Behave. Hi everyone, my name's Brittany and welcome back to Untitled Thoughts. Today is part 2 of the DIY fantasy gown mini-series, if you can call 2 episodes a mini-series. In part 1, I discussed how I came about creating the actual pattern for this fantasy gown for my friend Astrid, who has since sent me pictures of the completed dress with her modeling it, and they are amazing. So in part 2, I wanted to show you all how I actually finished out this garment, from cutting the parachute material, which took literal hours, to assembling the inner corsetry of the bodice and assembling foam cups for the first time, all the way through to all those finishing touches that made the gown so special. So let's dive right in. All right, so it's time for what I believe is going to be the trickiest bit of this entire project, which is actually cutting out the pattern from the parachute material, because it is massive. Yeah, so I am going to dive right in, and I've got my favorite pair of scissors, and we're just gonna see what happens. So I just finished cutting out all of these, I don't even know what this is. This is like a netting that was all around the edge of the parachute. And I think that by cutting this off, the actual fabric will lay a little bit smoother, because this was definitely creating like that parachute thing where it's like a circle, you know, to catch the wind. So hopefully with this gone, these can be laid flat to cut out. Which is exactly what I wound up doing. So I wound up cutting through the parachute fabric so that it was no longer in a 3-dimensional form, and then just slowly laying out each of my pattern pieces as best as I could. I wanted to incorporate some of the seam lines that were already present in the parachute. So I took my time to really lay out each and every pattern so that I maximize the amount of really cool geometric lines in the skirt. I only wound up recording myself cutting out the first skirt piece, and this is sped up quite a bit. It took me so long to cut out all of the pattern pieces. I was definitely here for quite some time. I honestly didn't realize that the parachute fabric was going to be that challenging to cut, but it definitely was very slippery and flinky and required a lot of patience. All right, so after nearly 3 hours of cutting this project out, I think I'm finally ready to start sewing. So that's what I'm gonna go do. Just kidding. I realized that after all of that cutting, I still had more pieces to cut, including the under bodice layer of Coutil, which provides a lot of structure for this dress since it is going to be boned. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm just laying out all my pattern pieces and cutting out that under layer. And once the underlayer of Coutil was cut out, I went ahead and prepped the parachute fabric so that I could cut that out as well using the bodice pieces. And honestly, this fabric pressed out really nicely. It did get a lot of wrinkles just from being stored in a bag, but it was really nice and easy to press. And then I just went ahead and cut out all the rest of my pattern pieces. So because cutting out the pattern pieces took me much longer than I originally anticipated, it wasn't until the very next day that I actually got to start sewing. And when I did start sewing, I started with that bottom layer of Coutil, again, just because I knew that this was going to take the most amount of work. I really wanted to knock it out. With the Coutil layer all sewn up, it was time to bring it over to the iron to press it. And I actually love using this Tailor's Point press clapper. I purchased this way back when I made Arlen's suit for our wedding, and it's come in such handy for so many different projects. It really helps to get seams nice and flat by absorbing the heat right after you press a seam. Once I was done pressing that underlayer, it was back to sewing. And once all of the bodice pieces were sewn up, it was time to press them as well. I wound up using a ham to press the bodice cups just because I felt like that would be a lot easier to get a nice smooth shape on the actual cup. And I actually think it's something that Daria, who created the original pattern that I'm basing this dress off of, suggests in her own tutorials. And back to the machine I went to finish up sewing the skirt pieces of this dress. With the skirt pieces complete, it's time to prep the inside of the corset. To start, I went ahead and grabbed some scrap parachute fabric and my pinking shears and cut out strips. These strips are going to be what holds all of the boning, the spiral steel boning, into place against the Coutil layer. With all of the strips cut, it was time to prep the Coutil layer. So what I'm doing now is just marking the seam allowances and then pinning the strips of fabric into place along those seams. So I'm basically covering my seams with the strips of fabric. And then this is what it looks like all pinned together. And now it's time to sew them together. So I'm going to be sewing 3 out of the 4 sides, leaving one side open, and this will be where I actually can slide in the spiral steel boning. So I'm basically making like a little pocket. And this is what it looks like. I wound up using a zigzag stitch just to really reinforce and help make sure that this fabric does not fray too much. And here is the little pocket that I was talking about where the spiral steel boning will slide into later. All right, so now I'm going to prep the spiral steel boning for the actual corset part of the garment. So I've done this a few times and I just really enjoy the process, and I thought that if anyone was curious how to use spiral steel boning, this would come in handy. So I've got my inner bodice laid out in front of me, and I'm going to measure roughly how much spiral steel boning I'm going to need. And I want to make sure it doesn't go all the way to the top or too far to the bottom, as I still need to put the caps on this, as well as have enough room to sew the casing closed. I want a nice little bit so that I can move, so mine's going to be right about here. I found that twisting to open up the spirals helps. This part is the trickiest, but I'm going to clip through one layer of the spirals first, which I always struggle with. One of them has been cut, so now I'm going to do the other one. You can pull the spirals apart to make it easier, see? I've pulled mine apart and then just cutting it is super quick. So then I'm going to clip off this excess here at the top where it's a little wonky, and it'll look something like this. And then it's time to attach the cap ends, which protects the inner garment from the raw edge of the boning. And for this part, you'll want to have a pair of needle nose pliers, and then, well, you'll probably want 2 pair, but I lost my second pair, so I'm gonna use these big old pliers. So what I'm going to do is slip this cap over one end of the boning so it looks something like this. Then I'm going to take one of my pliers and clamp down on the cap while using the second pair to clamp the cap sideways. When you clamp down, the cap kind of gets squished outwards, so then you have to clamp it inwards from the side, which makes the cap release a bit from the boning, and then you have to repeat the whole process, which is why I found it best to clamp from both directions simultaneously. I just do this until I feel the cap really lock into place. Finally, I will wrap the cap ends of the boning with some biodegradable tape. This is again to prevent the metal from tearing through the inner layers of the garment. And here's what the ends look like all wrapped up. Now I am just going to finish capping the remainder of my boning pieces. I've already cut them off camera as I didn't think it'd be interesting watching me struggle to cut each individual piece, though it would have probably been really funny. Now that all of my boning has been capped, I'm going to finish up by wrapping each end in tape. Whew! Now that all of my boning has been completed, it's time to slide each piece into its corresponding casing and then sew them up. All right, so truth be told, I have never actually sewn foam cups into any type of corseted garment. This is my first time. Usually I'm able to omit them just because the material is like a little bit more structured, but because we're working with parachute material, I don't think that that's possible to completely omit the cups. So you're going to be learning alongside with me as I try to attempt to attach some foam cups to this bodice. So it seems pretty straightforward. I'm just going to start off by pinning my cup piece to the actual foam cup. yeah, so far this is looking pretty decent. So I'm going to take this over to the sewing machine and sew the two together along the outer edge. So my cup wasn't lining up exactly perfectly, so I decided to hop on the computer and do a little bit of research and watch some tutorials. So I've just looked at the sew along that Daria has for sewing foam cups to a bustier top. This is her pattern that I'm using. I've modified for this project. She's done it a little bit differently than I have, but there are some points that she used that I am going to try and incorporate in this next step, especially with the underwire channeling. So I think that it'll all work out in the end, but I guess we will see. Also, I will link to her tutorial here because I think that it's a really great one, especially if you are working on a boned bustier bodice of any kind. She has really great tips and I think that you'll like it. Let's start with the positives of today. I think that I figured out how to do the foam cup for this bodice. Negative, I realized that I now have to cut 1 to 2 additional layers for the bodice itself because you can actually completely see straight through to the coutil underneath and all the boning, which isn't that great. Especially, I mean, from the inside it might not be a problem, but from the outside it doesn't look the best. So here is what I wound up with as far as the cup goes. There is a little seam because I sewed it backwards compared to how Daria did it, but I actually quite like this little seam because it kind of matches these inner seams as well. And then on the back I've just pinned it, and the cup was actually a little bit too big, so you can kind of tell that there's like extra space in here, but I just pinned it directly to the edge because I really need this to reach all the way. And I tried it on to see how it would fit, and it actually looks quite nice. So the cup provides the structure on one side, whereas this provides support on the inside for the bust. And then as for the coutil layer, this is what it looks like with one layer of the fabric on top, so you can see the stitching through, and it's actually even worse on this side because of the double layer of green, so it doesn't quite cover it at all. But when you double layer it, it does a good job of masking the inside. So that's why I think I'm going to have to cut out another layer for this. So I've got another hour left before I have to call it a day, so I'm just going to continue sewing and see where that gets me and then pick up tomorrow. So last night I managed to finish the bodice of the dress, and I sewed together all the pieces of the skirt. The bodice of the dress was a bit finicky and tricky, especially because the cup pieces, the foam cup inserts, didn't quite match the original pattern. So I had to finagle that a little bit, but I managed to get it to work. And the skirt is looking good. So now hopefully today I can just put everything together. And it's a bit rainy outside, so any footage that I get today may be a little bit like darker, but yeah, that's my goal. I'm hoping to get the entire dress assembled and maybe, if anything, just leave finishing touches for tomorrow, but hopefully by the end of this week, fingers crossed, the entire dress will be complete. So this is the finished bodice. The cups came together quite nicely. I really love the look of them on the outside with this little see-through bit. There was a little bit of excess from the fabric, so I'm just going to pin this out and hand stitch it in place. And this was the part that kind of came up a little bit, but I don't mind it because it's right underneath the arms. This is what it's looking like. So it has a nice clean finish. You can't really see the boning inside. These soft underwire channelings to really give structure to this dress. So all that's left to do is to attach it to the skirt. Oh my gosh. So that was probably the world's longest hem that I've ever done. But I was able to try the dress on and it fits amazingly. I was not expecting that. I mean, I kind of was because I had hoped that I had sewn the dress well, but for it to actually fit really, really well and the whole effect to come together is just brilliant. So I do think that I will be able to finish this dress today, deliver it this weekend, and I'm super excited. So to finish up this project, I am just sewing some clasps to the back because I did want this dress to be adjustable with some bra clasps. So here are two. And then finally, all we need is a good steam, and I think that this dress is complete. Oh my gosh, I cannot believe that I created this with my own two hands. I am so excited with how this project turned out. I hope that you all really enjoyed me taking you through the entire process from start to finish, because this was the first creative project that I've actually worked on in quite some time, and it was really fun to just kind of like stretch that creative muscle and see what I was capable of sewing wise. And I have to really thank all of the people who helped me in the past when I went to go make my actual wedding dress. It's really because of them that I was able to put those ideas into practice with my own wedding dress and then eventually with this fantasy gown, because since the time we got married to now, I've learned so much about how to incorporate more corsetry into garments that really need that inner structure, and this one was just my latest, and it was, again, so much fun. So if you like this video, feel free to like and subscribe and ring the notification bell so that you are always informed of when I post a new video. And if you like this project and you want to see me do more of this type of thing, feel free to let me know in the comments below. I am super down to, try different things and stretch my skill set and see what else I can come up with that maybe isn't for everyday use and is more of fantasy in nature. So yeah, thanks. Bye. It is obligatory that you come and say goodbye to everyone, Nolame, because you were part of all of the first videos. Oh.